So there's always a danger of this, but there are a few different topics I can riff on, but I've had this thing where I've been doing these coaching calls with groups of students, and what I realize is when I come with a topic pre-prepared, it's usually inferior to if somebody in the audience suggests something. So does anybody have a burning topic? There are a few different directions we could go, and there are a few things I could throw out or suggest, but if somebody's got a topic they really want to delve into, would love to hear it.
I'll say, if I may say, this like metronome displacement.
Okay.
Something that really, I've been struggling a lot with that.
Okay. What about it specifically?
So it's that thing in which I start to put that beat like in the or the E, you know, and then my brain just wants to like default, like bring me back, and it's hard to like, even if I do it super slow, it's like, how do you maintain that little space between like your one and the click? Got it.
Okay, so I have an imperfect answer for that. I have something that I do with my students.
I don't quite understand the question.
But here's the point, because instead of just answering that, what if I make this a whole topic and then we talk about what metronome displacement is, why we do it, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, let me get behind the kit. So, I discovered metronome displacement in probably the mid-20 teens, and I'm not sure if somebody else had done it first, and I mean, I know a lot of people did, but I'm not sure if I got it from somebody else or if I just decided to start experimenting with it. But basically the impetus was I started listening to a lot of recordings of myself, like in the early 20 teens. I was like, let me get on the internet, because I thought I was hot. I'm like, everyone needs to hear me. And then I started scrutinizing these recordings and realizing my time was whack, right? Like probably multiple people have had a similar experience. And I'd been practicing with the metronome in the conventional spot. So by conventional spot, I mean just like a click track, right? Like you're playing, you're just gonna have it on quarters. And that's where we learn to follow it when we're playing with a click. And I noticed that even though I was good at locking up with the click when it was on the downbeats, that there were still imperfections in my time that persisted and were able to escape that. And there were really two major categories of that. So one is consistency of subdivisions within a beat. So say your 16ths, right? So like you're playing a funk groove. Like, are all those 16ths a consistent distance apart? You're playing a swing groove, right? Are these, is the distance between the first and the last eighth note consistent? So that's one kind of time. And when you listen to the players I was listening to at the time, like Thomas Pridgeon or Justin Tyson, like those guys all had, Juliana, right? Juliana, Nate Wood, all had really, really consistent subdivisions between their beats. And it occurred to me that that was a really, really big component of what we call groove. It's just like what makes a beat danceable. It's a player's ability to put that subdivision in exactly the right place. So that, I may not have been the first one to call it this, but that's what I called microtime. And I decided to come up with a metronome practice regimen that would make it impossible for me to fail without noticing in a really huge way. So hence metronome displacement, or what some people call gap click. And again, like a bunch of people arrived at this before I did, but I sort of just coincidentally also arrived at it. So two big ones I like to do are 8th offbeats and 16th offbeats. 8th offbeats, obviously 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then 16th offbeats were probably the thing that really got my playing like locked up. And I used to put the metronome on like basically 8th notes because I had a cheap metronome, and then just hear it in a different place. So like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and would just be 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. And I practiced getting that faster and faster until I think I hit a speed limit of something like 150 BPM with 16th offbeats, and I figured that was adequate. And we'll definitely get to your question about how to make that easier. But then, okay, so actually let's dilate here because we'll answer his question, and then we'll segue to the second type of time that I was thinking about. So for the 8th offbeats and 16th offbeats, what I would very often do is everybody kind of has a speed limit with it, right? So for a while, say I could only play it at 100 BPM. Maybe I'd put it on at 105 or 110, and that would be like fast enough that my ear kept like switching it around. So one thing I would do was just, you know what? I think my phone volume's high enough that I can demo this a little bit, even without the PA, and then I'll just play quietly. So let's make this, I'm gonna put myself on the spot here. Let's make this 120. See if, oh yeah, this is doable. We can definitely do this. So, right? But it wasn't always thus. Way before I could do that, I had to just trial and error it.
Was the click doing every other 16th note just now?
Correct. So 1 E and a 2 E and a.
Okay.
So there are two major components to this. One is obviously don't go too fast. So it's like if you have trouble hearing the click at 120, like try backing it off to 110. If it's a challenge at 110, because there's a natural speed limit, and it's not even our physicality, it's just our ear. But as I say, if you're challenging yourself to go a little bit faster, one thing that helped me was to try to have some part of my body lining up with the click. And then I was sort of physically quantizing myself so that made it more difficult for my ear to turn it around. So just for instance, if I'm trying to think of this as 1 E and a 2 E and a, maybe I'll put the right hand on 16th offbeats on the hat, and then I'll try to play a beat underneath that. So. And I discovered that my speed limit that way was like a little bit higher. And then very gradually, I could transition between that and doing some bars of playing 8ths or something. So maybe I would try to do 4 bars of hi-hat on 16th offbeats and then 4 bars with hi-hat on conventional 8ths. By the way, playing, well, I almost fucked it up. Playing straight 8ths is actually harder than just soloing, right? Like, right? Like that's easier than going when you're trying to hear the gap click. But that's there's a reason why. So that's one thing. The other thing I would do is try putting it on eighths. So now let's really zero in and get specific to your question. In what very specific scenario are you having trouble? Is it 16th offbeats at a like particular tempo?
So the eights, I find them easy because it's a little bit like reggae, like, you know. But the 16s, it's what I find that when I try to do what you just did, it just at some point it goes back to the click. If I try to do like, if I think of it like a note before the beat and then a note after the beat and group them in three, you know, like tick tick, like hit, click, hit. I just lose it. I like that. I cannot do it with even in distances in both sides. If that makes sense.
Are you able to get it started and then it regresses?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're able to do that, then I'd recommend what I'm talking about. And I guess you could switch the limb too, right? So you could do like, I'm going to try to stay in one place more so that I don't drive Cole crazy. You could do hi-hat on offbeats, and then you could switch to hi-hat on eighths and kick on offbeats. So, right? So when you're going on eighths with the right hand, you're still catching the offbeats with a certain limb. And then it's just a lot of trial and error. But I would just use the difficulty to gauge whether it's too fast too, because I think like pulling this out of thin air, but like you should choose a tempo where if you use that approach to it, you should succeed at least like 75% of the time. And if you're not, then it's too fast. But just as my friend Jacob says, just like try to bump it up 1 BPM every day. I want to go on to macro time, but before we do, was that helpful? Okay, awesome. Okay, so macro time. So I don't remember exactly when this was, probably the 20-teens, when I was seeing a lot of live music, but there was a drummer who's since gotten much better and who's already very good, but I was watching him with like a couple of name players, and his subdivisions were fierce. Like he was just doing all the stuff, all the Juliana stuff, all the Nate Wood stuff. But what I noticed was over the course of 10 or 15 minutes, the song was slowing down noticeably. So I realized that there's another type of time, which is within a musical context, of course, like if this is what you want musically, being able to end the song at the same tempo where you begin it. And you can think of a lot of drummers who intentionally don't play very quantized, who play very sort of loose and over the bar line, where like the end of the song is roughly the same tempo as the beginning of the song. I might get in trouble here, but like Love Supreme, probably like within 5 BPM at the end of where it started, like Fee Fi Fo Fum, Wayne Shorter, right? Like pretty close to the same tempo at the end as it was at the beginning. Joshua on Four and More, not the same. That's a jazz joke. But I realized that you needed a different metronome regimen to practice this other type of time, which I called macro time. So instead of having the click on 16th offbeats or like every 4th, 16th or something, I would try to make it infrequent. So like last quarter note of the bar, or like beat 4 of every second bar or something like that. So put myself on the spot. Let's see if I can do this. I tried this at Drumeo and they were like, I was like, was it good? And they're like, would you like another take?
That was polite.
I'm learning that that's the way people say that, by the way. That's not the only person that said that to me. Okay, so we'll stay at 120. And let's put it on the last quarter note. Okay, so it's not perfect, and watch me turn that around. Watch me make a bug a feature. And that's the point, you guys. It's not supposed to. No, but I still practice a lot like this. Like when I'm practicing in time, that's the most frequent type of time practice I do, because I feel like I think you have to get to a certain familiarity where maybe your time is within 5% of pretty good, and enough so that when you hear that you're off, you're able to kind of adjust it, but not over adjust it to recover. But when you get your ear in that sort of window, then that way of practicing time just shows you so many like auditory optical illusions. So I just feel like it's deep tissue massage every time I practice with the metronome like that. And I can show you like a crazy thing I do. But before I do that, what was the other thing I wanted to talk about? Shoot. We did micro time, we did macro time. We did every fourth. Nope, lost it. It'll probably come back to me.
You do that with odd too, odd times as well?
Okay, here we go.
Sorry.
No, no,
The swing is easier for me when I do that. When I swing the metronome, swing it on to it. But
so like swung eighth off beats?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's easier for me, but I was just curious about odd times.
So actually, like let's do this. What did I have? I think I had it at like 84, but we'll go 80. So I've got it on 2 and 4 at 80 BPM. And like, there's a lot. Let's make it 85, just because this is what I'm shooting. There's a lot that you can do there, and the thing that I've been practicing with this is different lengths of bars within the same amount of time, and sort of hearing where those subdivisions click. So I'm lazy, so I haven't like gone up to 9 or 10. Well, maybe 9's the only one I haven't done. But you can do for like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8, and then obviously you're back to 4, 4. So just for instance, 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. So, and I don't necessarily do that ascension ladder every practice session, but I'll very often, like I've had this on like, that was 85, but I've had this on 86 for like the last 3 weeks. I haven't really changed it, but I'll just like play around that. So it's like, yeah, let me play 4 beats to the bar at that tempo. Now let me modulate to 6, because like 6 is giving me a bunch of trouble. So that's one way I practice odd meters. If it's something really weird like 9, I might figure out a way to use it more as a crutch. Does that make sense? Okay. I think whatever I was going to say, I lost it, so let's table that one for now. Maybe it'll come back to me. It really was. It's always like the best things where you're like, nope, lost it. But yeah, let's move on. Who's got another topic? Yes, sir.
Okay, I have a question. Like when we start our beginning jazz exercises, we're playing 4 on the floor, playing 2 and 4, which is great. And then when we hear a little bit more modern stuff of that, we hear people playing time, and they're using the bass and hi-hat with the snare, like
Yes.
3 voice orchestrations to go. So can you give an example where you're still playing that 4/4 time, and maybe you got the 4 and the 2 and 4 play, and then just like slowly start switching it where it's still propulsive 4, but there's a little more machinery going on there.
Yes. And I don't even think you need to transition. It's like if you watch Greg Hutchinson, like he can just immediately, like he'll ghost 4 on the floor, and then he'll just play accents like right out of the gate. So like, yeah, I've been practicing that. And I wish you guys could see my right foot, but when I play, I should have gotten some 5/8 too for the jazz. When I play, when I feather the kick drum, like I don't even care if it actually makes contact at this point. Like it's gone from explicit to like really soft to like maybe I just have like a little neural impulse going through my leg, and I think that's kind of the spirit. I think it's more the same way we would practice like coordination exercise with the hats on all 4, and then maybe you're not even playing the hats, but it just so. But yeah, I'll stop talking and just. So like that's feathering, but I'm just putting it like. Just putting accents in between it. Did you want something more specific?
Yeah, where you're playing, you're not playing 2 and 4 and I, you're playing stuff with, you're playing snare hat, bass thing, left foot hat.
Ah, okay.
More like,
Okay, all right.
It's all 3-way comping.
yeah, more like DJnet does, where he's playing and it's straight, it's just 4/4, but you hear this hi-hat and snare and bass.
So, and was the question?
Points in the beat.
Was the question if I'm doing like a non-walking jazz beat in 4 that's more of like a broken Keith
broken
Jarrett?
time.
Okay,
Broken time.
so the disclaimer here is I don't think Jack is feathering as he does that.
No,
Okay.
I'm saying you get away from that into a whole different thing, which is the broken time.
Okay.
You just said broken time.
Okay. I don't know. It started shittier and it got better. There's been a minute.
You're playing time without going spangalang, but it still sounds like you're playing time, is what I meant. That was cool.
Cool. Well, let me try to pull something out of that that I can make universal. So one thing I've dealt with a lot recently, because I recently just started coaching jazz students, and actually like I've played jazz. Jazz was the first thing I played when I graduated from school, but I've never actually taught jazz. So it was a bit of a like, yeah, let me come down. That was a bit of a humbling experience. I wouldn't have felt like I was ready to teach jazz 3 years ago, whatever. Finally, maybe I felt like I was in a place where I could teach it. Obviously, the shadow of John looms large. But one question I'd always aim to answer in my own playing, and this is going to segue perfectly to your question, is what's the continuum between 4 on the floor and spangling and hats on 2 and 4? And that's sort of John's second book, right? Beyond Bop Drumming, DJnet, Paul Motion, that whole language. And the deeper I got into it, the more I realized John had been like leaving me clues, but I just hadn't paid attention to them. But I sort of thick-headedly, I sort of had to put it together for myself. So yeah, I can kind of take you through that continuum, but I'll tell you what the conundrum was for me, which was playing at jam sessions. There's not much opportunity to do the DJnet stuff.
Yeah, you stop spang-a-langing and they get mad at you.
Exactly. Yeah, like those horn players, those bass players, they just want a really strong 4 feel. So like, how do you do that and not get locked in just 2 and 4 jail? Because I would always feel like I couldn't escape like 1959.
Yeah.
Like that's the farthest forward in history. So I'd be
It was
like,
a very good year.
yeah. It was a lot happened. And I'm like, I mean, how do I get to Tony territory? How do I get to Elvin territory?
Right.
And so the yeah, and this has been super interesting to give to my students because I can see like how they work through it, and I can kind of reverse engineer like what order to put things in. But like, so I have them doing 2 things simultaneously. I'll start with the exercise and then I'll go back and maybe do a little history. But there are 2 things I have them do simultaneously. So one is literally just feathering spangling, like jazz lesson 1, like. Okay, so what are we practicing when we do that? Because that wasn't always super clear to me. And John would have said something like sound, because he very often would just give me clues because he wanted me to figure it out for myself, which I think is a better way of teaching, by the way. I think I retain stuff a lot better than if he had just told me directly. But it's, first and foremost, I think it's the consistency of the swung eighth and the articulation on the ride cymbal. So it's like bringing out the quarter but not bringing out the quarter too much, and the sound of the ride cymbal, right? So it's like you want it propulsive but not too heavy. There's just all those subtleties, right? And then the coordination aspect of it. So when I start students on this, very often one of the hardest things for them to do is to get everything in time and lined up, and then also make the kick drum soft. So I tell them what John told me, which is like, just make it in time first and then worry about making it soft. So like if they play that for me and it's in time and it's locking up, I'm like, great. And then incrementally over the course of a few weeks, like just think about the kick drum, try to bring the volume of the kick drum down. And then we add something else, which is Tony Williams phrases, Tony Williams style phrases, or Roy Haynes style phrases, except slowly with the kick feathered on every beat. So that would just be like 3, 4. Right, so I'll give them prescribed exercises for that, because what's that doing? Now that we've chunked being able to do the coordination and the sound, we're starting to introduce a little more of the language, like some of the idioms. And then from there, I'll actually ask them to start improvising phrases. And if they don't know what to do, like I'll ask them to check out a recording, like one guy's checking out Fee Fi Fo Fum right now. So that's on one side. And then on the other side, I've got these jazz beats, which are just sort of like Mel Lewis-ish idioms, but with quarters on the ride first. So like. So they're almost like John Riley book idioms, except incorporating the hat mostly on quarters, and then with quarters on the ride. And that's to get people phrasing, and I don't tell them this explicitly, but there's kind of a language where the hat's only playing on quarters mostly. It's not really playing off beats the way DJnet would. And the ride's playing quarters, but then you can do off beats and kind of idiomatic Kenny Clark, Philly Joe type stuff with the snare and kick drum. And then gradually we introduce the skip note to that. So say you've got a theme and variation where the melody with the other three limbs is prescribed, but then you're adding more spangling each time. So like, and they start to learn idiomatic ways to improvise that. And then finally, we get into triplets and then being able to play the hi-hat on offbeats. And what that creates is this kind of Max Roach language, where you're not fully in Roy Haynes' Dijonette land, but you're also not just like, you're not.
You pulled us away for a little, but you were still playing good, strong time. That was cool.
Right. So just imagine like. Right. So it still feels anchored. It still feels grounded. And nobody's gotten to this yet, but I suppose eventually I'll put in the Greg Hutchinson kick feathering even between the accents. And yeah, I think I like to use Max Roach as the kind of touchstone for that, because I think he's the closest sound to like what that language sounds like to me, because maybe Danny Richmond too with Monk, but both of them played the hats on resolution points. So really it would be like taking some part of a Max Roach waltz and using that for if you're making a 3-beat phrase within 4. And then Max like had some very idiomatic things he would do in 5. So if you happen to be making a 5-beat phrase over 4. And actually most of these phrases are like that, you know. Right, so what's this? That's just a jazz waltz, right? So it's like your body learns that this sort of idiomatic way to play different phrase lengths. And the punchline to this whole story is when I think way back, actually John was like subtly explaining that to me like 20 years ago. So if I'd listened better, I probably would have absorbed it quicker. What he did was he was just like, hey, take a passage out of my book, because he's got these sort of like Kenny Clark idioms in his first book, where you're just supposed to play Spangling and then like comp. And he's like, instead of just playing Spangling, just let the ride cymbal vary, like, and just stop when it feels good. And so I did that, and he's like, there, you nailed it. And I'm like, what did I do? And he's like, there's a 5-beat phrase, and you played like an idiomatic 5-beat phrase with the ride cymbal. There it was.
Cool.
Yeah. What else? What other topics do we want to? Yes, sir.
I have a question about backbeats and hits.
Okay.
And like which hand to hit them with. I guess like generally when you first start out, you're taught to like, okay, if you're a right-handed drummer, hit like the crash cymbal with the right hand, backbeat with the left hand. But if you like get into like triplet fills or more complex stuff, then I often find myself kind of like in knots at the end, trying to figure out which hand to hit the one with, or also which hand to hit the backbeat with, like in the middle of a fill.
Yeah. Okay, let me crunch on that for a second. So the first thing I'll say, maybe a little demo, so that people understand. This is actually something I've been thinking about a lot too, because I think I sort of will try to phrase things so that I preferentially, I'm right-handed obviously, so that I can preferentially land on the right hand, and then I like to have a crash cymbal over here because it makes sense. Right, and so like in the middle of that, my brain's kind of like calculating the landing point and then like how to end. But I do think it's important to practice some ambidexterity and then hitting the crash over here with the left. What would be the? Right, like that sort of thing. And I don't know if I ever practiced anything specific for that, but I'll tell you one thing. So when mid-20 teens, I was like super into Marcus Gilmore, and like I would see him on gigs and he would just be playing these like super minimalistic kits, right? Like a 4-piece of even that, and then just like one ride over here and then one lighter ride over here. So if he wanted to hit the crash, he had to end it on the left hand. You can always just wail on the ride. That sounds awesome too. But anytime he wanted to end on the other cymbal, he was hitting it with the left hand. This is great. I'm like real time, like shucking and jiving, trying to figure out how to make this an actionable lesson. It's like the process when I make a video, only in real time. So, okay, say I was going to make a video about this, I would probably like improvise a little bit and then think about a few specific types of fills where it's really optimal to end on the left hand. So obviously, like one thing I like to do is kick, right, left with the crash. So that was the thing I was doing before. Right, like classic sort of hair metal thing. So that's one. Yeah, I really wish I'd thought this through more, but in general, yes, I think it's a good idea. Yes, I think it's a good thing to practice. And I'm going to hot potato it back to you, because maybe you can give me like a specific scenario.
Yeah, sure. So like, oftentimes when I'm like trying to just clean up my drumming, I'm like gonna play stuff slower, and like at the end of a phrase, and generally my brain is always like, okay, hit the crash with the right hand at the end, and like I could like reorient like the sticking that I start out with to like always make that happen, and I could like deliberately practice that. But I don't know if that's like something that I should be doing, or if instead I should just like naturally just, okay, if it ends on my left hand, just like practice that and hit the crash with my left hand if that's what it turns out to be.
Yeah. So do you find that the scenario is you're ending up in spots where hitting the left crash with the left hand would be optimal, but then you're rethinking it and trying to re-stick it so that you always end on the right?
Yeah, like I could, yeah, exactly.
No, I would embrace that left hand crash. I thought of another cool one, which is like a sextuplet where you start with the kick and then a right hand. So, and I feel like Nate Wood does those sort of things a lot. Like if I'm playing along with knee body, I'll always be. You can even like people don't think of that, but you can actually hit the ride cymbal with the left hand too. But yeah, totally, I would embrace that, because among other things, it looks cool. And like, I mean, I think like high-level players these days too will like. I think another thing you were alluding to is like coordination and what Spanky calls like one control, where say you're like. Right, so I'm moving around the kit, but I just know that I need to hit that stack on the backbeat. So that's definitely something like you see Jarris or Mike Mitchell, or like a lot of the modern guys, they'll definitely be orchestrating like that. And yeah, the other thing which your question made me think about was like creative ways to catch hits in the middle of a backbeat. Like maybe you're doing like a Tower of Power style funk thing, and then you've got a weird, like the horns come in on the offbeat or something, and like. Right, so you see people hitting that sort of thing too. Yeah, by the way, Dan Weiss, who's going to be here next week, is like one of the coolest things he does will be like have two competing ostinatos. So like he'll have one thing in the 5 and then something in 4 that's cycling over the top of that, and then he'll be like catching a cymbal crash to mark every time the 4 comes around. Like, so he's super into it too. Does that help to any degree? Cool. How are we doing for time, you guys?
It's good.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because I can go.
We can go all night, go to 4:30.
Heck yeah. All right, what else? Who's got another? Yes, sir.
I've been sent back to Jazzlands, specifically on like soloing over like a form.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working on that a lot, and I feel like I've been approaching it from like 2 angles almost. One is like playing the like melody of the tune and being like very like trying to do a like melodic,
Yeah.
like melodic solo, right? And that like, oh, you can hear what the tune is, and it's really easy to like keep the form that way. And the other angle I've been approaching is like on the rudimental side of like, okay, I'm gonna play my 6-stroke roll, I'm gonna do that for 4 bars, and then do another 4 bars of flans, and then like trying to keep the form that way. And I feel like eventually I wanna kind of make contact between those 2 parts of things, but I guess just like trying to go and switch between those 2 ways of playing more and still kind of keep the form is kind of what I'm having a hard time with.
Yeah. What would happen if you just completely Philly Joe'd out? Do you worry that you wouldn't keep the form in your head?
Totally, yeah, I would just like lose where I am.
Yeah.
Not come in or stop at the right time, and the sax player would be mad at me.
Yeah. How long have you been playing jazz?
3 or 4 years.
Okay. So the first answer is a bit of a cop-out, which is that comes with time. Because when I think to the reasons I'm able to keep the form in my head, it's like 15 years of jam sessions and not wanting to get yelled at, and just listening to music. So Don will appreciate this. You shouldn't underestimate the power of like long periods of time with just consistent work. So there may not necessarily be a magic bullet. But I'm also tempted to say like the unsexy answers might be the right ones here too, where like are you listening to the tune in the car? Are you trying to sing it when you're away from the drums? Actually, okay, this is a slightly sexy one. This is something I suggested to one of my best students. He actually took it and ran with it. But instead of sitting at the kit and doing all the stuff you're doing, which is great, I would also first just like sing the song to yourself while you're clapping time, and then gradually start doing like more complex and interesting things while you're either singing it or keeping it in your head. Because I think that's what it's supposed to feel like when it's working, is like you've just got this sort of magnetic pull toward the form, and soaking wet in your sleep, drop out of a helicopter in the middle of the night, you can still like find the top of stablemates or whatever. I'm trying to think whether I have more. Yeah, well, anyway, how does that land so far?
Totally, I feel like all that, like, oh, I'm going to go and sing the tune to myself and just like know it. That falls in the melodic camp, and if I'm like playing on the anthropology, I go da 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 da, and like, cool, I can like keep the form that way. And once I like start to just go crazy with it, I kind of lose the melody in my head, and that's why I go back to like I have to count to 8 to
Okay.
So like trying to get away from just going and keeping the melody in the forefront of my brain and still stick with the form.
I'm going to take issue with your whole concept
Okay, sure.
because I'm not sure that separating those two things are actually the goal. I think the goal is just to have it so deeply ingrained that they're happening simultaneously, but that the melody's happening at a more subconscious level. Another thing that you could do occurred to me though, which is like actually listen to other drummers solo over it and sing over it and keep it in your head. Yeah, and anthropology is a good one too. I'm just trying to picture. Yeah, I really think it's a coordination exercise. It's like a singing and playing piano type of thing, except it's soloing over it while having the melody in your head. So I don't think there's necessarily a shortcut until maybe it's deep enough ingrained that you can do your stuff. But just for instance, you're like, oh, I practice melody, and then I'll try to practice like sextuplets over it. I think the move is just like have that melody going in your head and then get as complex as you can. Like instead of having one category and another category, maybe you have a continuum. Again, I feel like this isn't anything that other teachers haven't discussed, but you know. And then right, like little by little, building on what you were able to do. And everybody kind of says that, but I feel like the sweet spot of it is nobody takes it far enough, which is when you start to lose it, instead of getting frustrated and giving up, like back it off just like 5%, and then like sit in that zone where it's complex enough to be challenging, but so much that you're almost losing the form, but that you're not quite. And then if you do, like back it off again, and then go back and just keep trying to touch that limit. But yeah, just all the other stuff to continue getting the song ingrained. Cool. That time thing never came back to me. Yeah, what else? Uh-oh, I'm gonna play again then. How about, okay, if I'm gonna play something, maybe do some crowd work. Like, is there some particular concept you guys wanna hear, or like an idea kernel, or like something you'd like me to build a solo off of?
Something Spaven-esque.
Okay.
Spaven inspired.
talk about something I've been practicing. Yeah, so something I've heard myself playing a lot is like different combinations of dotted rhythms and quarter note triplets. And when I let my mind wander, like I've been practicing a lot of sort of free improvisations. There's a lot of ground you can cover with like keeping an ostinato somewhere, and then either playing a dotted rhythm or like an offset quarter note triplet with another rhythm. And then like that's a great place to metrically modulate. So it's like if I was trying to construct a free form solo from nothing, and that's kind of like been a mission for the last few months. One thing that's super cool is like, so say you've got a quarter note ostinato. Right, so then triplets over that quarter would just be quarter note triplets would be maybe that's even half note triplets, I don't know. Is that half note? I guess that's half note triplets. But the really hip thing is when you offset it. So like 3, 4. And you can kind of go deeper into that reference beat or like back out of it. So that's, I mean, so speaking of like stuff with the jazz, keeping the melody in your head while you're doing something else, it's an interesting challenge to kind of halfway metrically modulate, and then people think you've metrically modulated, but then go back to the original. So like, so that's one thing I've been digging. The other is like related, but it's dotted rhythms. So like in a straight eighth or straight 16th situation, you know. You know, that's not triplets, but it's hip. And then if you move that to different limbs, like one thing I've been trying to do with varying degrees of success is just like putting it in the hats. But maybe even more interestingly, that kind of becomes a sound. And even if you fake it, it sounds kind of cool. So it's like, say you want to play 5 beats to the bar. Maybe you want to do the classic like Dylan modulation, right? Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so quarters on the hats is one thing, but if you try to do dotted eights, I guess it would be, then like that's a vibe. So let's say I'm in 5. Sounds even better with the dry cymbal, right? And
So what are the hats doing in that beat that you're doing there?
so they're doing dotted eighths. So if you imagine just like,
So how fast is the 5 going by?
and I think maybe the larger thing this all illustrates is chunking, where you assemble all these component parts, where you're like, okay, well, what would it sound like if I did X? And then eventually you practice it enough and you're just like, okay, well, that's kind of a vibe. So it's like, I can just be blowing or doing something different. Like, I don't know, that was like a shitty instance of it, but I was trying to like, you get it. Yeah.
Would you like another take?
No, I think I'm good with that one. Yeah, how long have we been going? Do you guys know?
Hour and 15.
Hour and 15. Yeah, so maybe let's do another 15 and then call it. You can do like a meet and greet or whatever you guys want. Other questions or other topics you want me to address? Otherwise, I'm happy to keep playing and riffing.
Just in any of your practice exercise, when you hit your speed limit, as you said, and it's not necessarily just trying to get as fast as you can, but it's trying just to get over when you plateau. What are some techniques to get past that plateau?
For metronome practice?
Just if you're working on a particular pattern, a particular riff.
Okay. So yeah, actually, I think there's a different direction we can take this that's interesting. Actually, I was talking about this with Don earlier, where it's possible that there's no shortcut. Like there are certain things, so just for instance, a few years ago I was trying to learn the Evan Marion tune Sweatin', which is like this famous thing he did with Dana Hawkins where Dana takes a solo at the end in 30 seconds. That's absolutely crazy. And I could get a reasonable degree closer just by like bumping the metronome up a little bit every day. Like I think it's like quarter equals 180 or something like that. So maybe I do 160 for a couple days and then 165, et cetera. Right? But I think what helps even more than that was rewiring my brain to just be able to think of ideas as chunks. And the unfortunate thing about that is I may not have reverse engineered it well enough to describe exactly what it was I did.
What was the name of the tune?
Sweatin'? Yeah, Sweatin', Evan Marion. Yeah, so just, it's in 5. Actually, very, very similar to the vibe we were just playing. Like. And then at the end, like Dana just rips a solo that's, I guess 16ths if this is the quarter note, but it's, Let me see if I can actually do that in 5. Something, right? Like it's still challenging for me to keep the 5 in my head. It's probably easier if you're listening to the track. But what helped me approach that was sort of as we talked about with the jazz tunes, it wasn't so much like practicing the licks faster, but practicing the synergy between having this stuff in my head and then just kind of letting my hands be able to go on autopilot. So I think an important meta skill for this whole thing is actually this concept of soloing over a form, where, and I wonder if people who don't explicitly do jazz, actually if they're missing out on some curriculum here, because when it comes to jazz, like it's just a skill that, you know, say you've got like a 32 bar form, or like a weird song, like a 40 bar form with like a second ending with a extra bars on it, and you're expected to just solo over that, and everybody else on the bandstand is counting along, and they'll immediately know if you lose it. So being able to keep your head focused on the form or where a one is while your body's doing extra things. And I really need to sit down and brainstorm some better ideas about this, but I think the same thing I recommended to our friend over here on the right, when it comes to starting with really simple ideas. And your question's about like, how do you increase your speed limit? Like, how do you go up to the limit more? So another revelation there is like, you don't need to play wall-to-wall 30-second notes. So judicious use of space as well. So there are a few different ways you can approach a speed limit. One would be like the absolute speed of your hands, which I think is kind of like the most primitive way. Another would be the speed of your idea deployment, which when you think about somebody like Dana Hawkins, he's obviously just clocking at a really high RAM so that he can just rotate the shape in midair and just like make it really interesting. But the other dimension is the rate at which you're playing things. So it's like you could have one exercise where you're starting at 150, bumping the metronome up. You could have another where you're at the tempo and you're modulating between simple and complex, or whether you sprint with 30 seconds for 2 bars, or play like basic eights. I'm gonna try to do this because I like to challenge myself. Like that sort of thing. Yeah. How's that landing? Is there any way I can tailor it more specifically to be more helpful?
I think you kind of hit it, you know, I think of even triplets between hands and kick, or, you know, double kick, then hands, and just being able to take those component pieces and build those faster so that when you put them in a faster tempo song that they roll in.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad that's helpful. I guess maybe the last thing, maybe this will be a good note to end on for everybody, is like when I first started checking out all the cats, so like I had my jazz phase and then I had my sort of like Berkeley chops phase. So when I was checking out like Thomas Pridgeon and Nick Smith and Aaron Spears, R.I.P. Yeah, and all the cats. I thought like, oh, I need, in order to like play at a shed, right? Like you're playing a beat and it's 2 bars and then it's 30-second notes, go. I used to think like, oh, you need to know how to do everything. Like you need to be able to speak extemporaneously off the top of your head. And the more I got into it, the more I realized like, you can get a lot of mileage out of just a few kernels. like you can bootstrap just a few things so that you can like arrive at the shed and actually sound pretty respectable. And of course, like the really high level guys, like Dana, Mike Mitchell, Mason, like of course they're innovating and free associating on top of that. But like the lingua franca isn't actually all that complex. And I think there's another YouTuber that came up with this, but maybe the single most important lick of that entire idiom, the kind of prime directive, is just right, left, left kick. Like, right, like literally that's all I was doing, and then adding extra kick notes. And then possibly 6-stroke rolls, like. And variations of that. But one thing that I do with my coaching students is just take combinations of 2 different things and then just improvise with those. So say one of them is, and then one of them is. And I think the Gospel Chops guys literally did this, right? So this is yet another thing that somebody else invented that I just took 10 years to arrive at, and they're like, I'm a genius. But you make combinations between those 2 things, and the sequence of events has to stay fixed. But you can vary dynamics and orchestration. And you can do like 3 of one and 1 of the other. You can do 2 and 2. You can, so just for instance, like if I'm only on the snare, you could just like. Orchestrate. Right? So just like those 2 combination hats. And then the other cool one, my other ride or die, is actually a 3-beat. 3-note phrase with the gospel guys called 2 over 1, which would just be like, I think that's it. No, it's left, right kick, but it's right accent, left is ghost. So, right, so that's the classic, like. But you can make any combination of those and go over the bar line too. So. And then if you just imagine speeding that up. Right, like I think I cheated and threw in a kick double there, but literally that was an entire solo comprised of like just those 2 idioms, and like it gets pretty damn convincing. So I guess a final answer to that question about increasing your speed limit is like practice assembling chunks out of simple ideas. And then what I find happens a lot is I have enough pre-programmed things that my hands can just do, where there's a level at which my hands are just operating and they're kind of just making their shape that's just been drilled into them. And then when it's working, my brain's kind of like the orchestra conductor, where I can kind of decide like, oh, I want to orchestrate or add some dynamics or like go here or go there. But obviously I'm not thinking about every tiny little thing. Yeah, I think that's how it's supposed to feel. Ask me in 2 years, maybe there's a big piece I'm missing. Guys, this has been amazing. Let's wrap it. Really appreciate everybody coming out, and it's been awesome. Great questions.
And usually Will gives a little outro, he's not here, but I'll just give it that if you want to head down to the shop, Nate will be hanging for a little while and make meet and greet a bit, right?
Of course.
Sign the stuff if
Yes.
you want. So yeah, you can head down to the shop, we'll be right down, and once again, give it up for Nate Smith.
Thank you guys.